and welcome. I'm glad y'all all just spent your Thursday morning hearing about an interesting topic, right? So like David said, I'm Lisa Feldhausen. I've been here for about 20 years. Contracts and compliance, now solely compliance, and really where that compliance seems to focus now is on the international activities area. And so let me go ahead and jump in. All right, so I still haven't seen this. So we always lead kind of with this, A&M still embraces that culture of excellence that really values that international collaboration in an environment that promotes that. And so I haven't seen this culture change at A&M. It's just that now we're trying to balance that with meeting a lot of these new federal requirements. And so we are still committed to academic freedom and protecting that strength and vitality of the research enterprise. It's just getting to be very challenging. And I think a lot of researchers feel like we are trying to inhibit that. And we're not. So we're really just trying to meet what the feds are telling us we have to do at this point. So really, we're actively responding to these concerns. And so they've really ramped this up, as David said. This was really a non-issue, 5 years ago? Now I'm attending a conference this week that really it's all about what the feds, NIH, NSF, what DOD, kind of what they're doing to address this research security and foreign influence and the new requirements that they're going to flow down to us to be able to accept that funding. And so really that undue foreign influence to them, we'll hear it called research security now a lot instead of undue foreign influence. But really it can range from those conflicting commitments, and really they're most worried about that conflict, in that country of concern, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But they still want to promote that international collaboration because they get that's kind of the crux of a successful research organization. So really, I know you guys, if any of you have ever heard me talk in the last couple of years, you've heard this foreign influence. Really what it is, it's that they're worried about that intent of another country to maybe further their military or economic goals to the detriment of the U.S. And so really what that is, they're looking at those foreign employment arrangements. And so you'll hear me talk about a little bit, they're really focusing on those foreign talent awards, that foreign grant that maybe you have and didn't disclose to the university or to the feds. They're really looking at that. And really it's about overcommitment, but it's also about maybe is that IP going somewhere that shouldn't be. So they're really looking at that in a whole approach there. That non-disclosure of substantial foreign research support. So we're getting in trouble for this. So that, and when I say we as a university, so they're looking at those grants. And if they see that that co-author was from, say, China, and wasn't disclosed as a collaborator on your grant, but come to find out maybe they were paid by that institution in China and they did a big portion of that NIH grant. NIH isn't happy about that. And so we have had to return funds to NIH because that wasn't disclosed to the university or to NIH, for example. So they're really starting to look at that as well. And then just the general statements that we've been hearing for the last couple of years is that failure to disclose. Y'all will probably get tired of hearing me say that word disclose, but that's what they're throwing out at us too. And that diversion of IP. So they are looking, if they see that super, that great intellectual property you developed here as part of their grant that they paid for 5, 10, 20 years, if they see that duplicate over in another country and maybe that wasn't disclosed, they're going to probably ask some more questions. The peer reviews, they're seeing some of that. They're seeing some of the proposals maybe that our peer reviewers are doing somehow ending up on that foreign grant. They're not sure how that shouldn't be happening, right? So they're really starting to pay a lot of attention to this. So what are they doing? So DARPA, for those of you who are familiar with Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they were really the first one to go public with a risk rubric that kind of made us start looking at, okay, what are the feds looking at? It included measures of how we assess that potential undue foreign influence, that conflict of interest, conflicts of commitment. Department of Army followed suit, and they kind of included some specific actions and kind of defined who they were looking at. Who do they consider the senior and key personnel in that project? DOD, so we're going to go into a little bit of detail with DOD. Theirs is in progress, but I don't think it's going to change from what they've told us. And so this one will possibly be the most restrictive for universities to have to follow if we want to accept DOD funding. And this is fundamental research funding. This isn't any of their classified research. Other examples. So I'm not going to list every single federal agency because they're all really starting to ramp up. But for example, NSF has, in their PAP guide, stated they may not accept a proposal if it has the potential to negatively impact research security and integrity due to credible information of a national security concern. So they're working on details of that. Now, NSF did state this week that they really think this is going to be a rare occurrence. Maybe they're hopeful, but I really think it won't happen too often. We're also going to go into National Presidential Memorandum 33 and the CHIPS and Science Act. And really, that's just to show you guys why we're doing what we're doing. It's not because we're sitting here just bored and thinking, how can we make your lives more miserable? Because that's absolutely not the case, because it's making our lives a little bit miserable too, right? So I'm going to jump in here with the National Security Presidential Memo. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this if you've ever heard me talk. They came out with guidance in January of 2022. And really it outlined commitments in these following areas. So they really wanted to engage with the research community to share information, standardized disclosure information. So this is a big one for us because it seems like NIH needs something a little bit different from NSF, and they need something a little different from DARPA. And really that administrative burden just to get just the little bit of tweaks is really unreasonable. Coordinating agency policy developments for research digital persistent identifiers. So that's so that if they go in and want to see what a full research portfolio of a researcher, there's one identifier that includes all of their research. And then developing research security program standards, which I'll focus on a little bit too, because that's what impacts us the most, I feel like, on our side. And so the 4 elements that we have to focus on is cybersecurity, the foreign travel security training, research security training, and export control training. And so really, I'm going to go into detail on those 4, but we have to. So this is why you're going to see some of the things you see come out of our office is because the feds are requiring that we certify we have this in place. And we have to maintain a description of what that finalized program looks like. We have to provide confirmation within 30 days if they ask us, hey, are you really doing this? And we have to designate a research security point of contact that anyone can contact and ask for any of this information. And so really, I'm going to go into those 4. So the first one, the foreign travel security. So we have to maintain international travel policies for covered individuals. They're still working a little bit on that definition. We're pretty sure we know what that is, but if they're engaged in federally funded research and development, but they're traveling internationally for business, teaching, to go to a conference, we see a lot of that. People travel to go to attend conferences or to collaborate. We have to have a policy in place of how do we track that? How do we prior approve that? So that's a big thing. So if you guys are familiar, we do have an international travel policy. It's not under our office, it's under risk and compliance. That does require prior approval. I think it's been a little bit loosely enforced, but this is going to force us to enforce that. And then mandatory applicable security briefings. So we don't know exactly what that is, but it's probably going to be what we're already doing. We're already giving you advice on your laptops and maybe if there's any specific export control concerns or research security concerns, we're already giving that to you in an email. And so hopeful that can suffice as that mandatory applicable security briefings. Research security training. So we have to implement a research security training program. And so I'm not going to go through all these elements because a lot of it we already have in place, we hope. So, for example, basic cybersecurity hygiene, a lot of that's already in our existing IT security training module and train track that everyone has to take. Export control training, we've already got that. You've already got financial conflicts of interest training. And so what you may see is some tweaks in some of those slides just to make sure that we are meeting what they want us to meet from a research security standpoint. But I'm hopeful we don't need another training, right? A whole nother new training. We have enough. I feel like there are some days they all come due at the same time. And I feel like I spend an entire day just getting my 1 or 2 year trainings done, right? So we really are hoping we can avoid a separate training, just tweaks to existing trainings. Cybersecurity, this is one that I think the smaller research institutions are going to really struggle with. On our side, we were working very closely with IT, and because we already handle controlled unclassified information, we already handle classified, a lot of this is already in place. So we're fortunate in that respect. We have our IT going through this to make sure that there's nothing that we need to add or address. But for some of our smaller universities, this is going to be a huge burden for them that don't already have these systems in place. This will be a huge expense. And then the last thing, export control training. So hopefully all of you have taken our Train Track export control training basic, but it's only required for certain groups. And so we've really been trying for a few years to try to make this export controls really applies to everyone, whether you research or not, student, the people in your lab, whether you're shipping things. So this may be something you see that's applied to everyone, and it will include some tweaks on what the feds say we need to emphasize. We need to emphasize that fundamental research exception has limitations, which we do understand that, because we do on our side get a lot of researchers saying, it's fundamental research, why are you bothering me type. Well, there's much more to it than that. So I think with the Fed, we must not be the only ones hearing that. So the feds say we need to maybe, highlight that a little bit in our training. So that may be a change. Some of you see, if you're not required to take it, it may be a requirement down the road. The CHIPS and Science Act. So it's very similar to NSPM 33. A big change here will be that it will prohibit involvement with malign foreign government talent recruitment programs. And so they've got a definition I'll go over here in just a little bit. Of course, it's a lot of the same as NSPM 33. So requirements to establish a research security, sharing and analysis organization, the training, which we've already talked about. Now, NSF has 4 grants, I believe it's 4, for various institutions to complete these training modules. Our A&M system and TEAS, I think, is working on one of the 4. They were awarded. They will not make this a requirement until those modules are done and complete for use. Inclusion of the training as part of RCR. So we've already got that covered on our side. A big change here will be the reporting on foreign financial transactions and gifts. And so we must report annually on foreign financial transactions on amounts over 50,000 from countries of concern. That reporting system isn't yet in place. They're working on it, but they hope to have it in place so that those first reports can be turned in July of 2024. There is still some discussion on, is there any way this can somehow work with the Department of Ed Section 117 reporting? I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with that. I believe that threshold is 250,000. It doesn't seem like they're going to be able to link those two. They may be two separate, but that's something that we'll have to be aware of and we're watching. Another one is a prohibition on Confucius Institute. So and I apologize for that typo. I just see institutes lowercase there. But what they are going to not be allowed to award an institution federal funding, NSF and DOD are 2 of them, if that institution has a Confucius Institute, unless you receive a waiver. And they act like these waivers will probably occur far and few between. But on our side, we got rid of our Confucius Institute years ago, so we don't have to worry about that. Department of Defense, I just want to go into them. They're the ones that we think is going to be the most restrictive. And so that's kind of why I'm highlighting DOD as well. So over the summer, they released a memo, and I say memo, it was about 20 pages, countering unwanted foreign influence in department-funded research at institutions of higher ed. And so really it provides a policy for security reviews as mandated by the National Defense Authorization Act and NSPM 33 for fundamental research. It provides a decision matrix, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, that kind of has people a little bit nervous just because it does look pretty restrictive, but it is DOD. So, and I just want to point out a few things. So they will be effective August 9th of 2024. They will be prohibited from providing funding, or keep in mind, this is fundamental research, or making an award to a covered individual if that individual is participating in a malign foreign talent recruitment program. And I'll define that on the next slide. Or to a proposing institution that doesn't have a policy addressing those foreign talent programs. So A&M is, working on that policy now, and I imagine it will be, you are not allowed to participate in a malign foreign talent recruitment program. Now that's a requirement of the CHIPS and Science Act. beginning in fiscal year 24. So we've already covered that, the Confucius Institute. So if that institution of higher ed hosts a Confucius Institute, probably won't receive funding unless you get that waiver from Secretary of Defense, which they kind of act like that probably won't happen. That decision matrix. So I really tried. The decision matrix is about 2 pages. If you look at that 20-page memo, I'm not smart enough to figure out how to get it on my slides, or I would have. But what it does, it includes factors for accessing that covered individuals, their associations, their affiliations, what collaborations they have, what fundings they've had. For example, is that individual involved in any type of talent recruitment program? Does that individual have outside funding or patents that maybe haven't been disclosed? And typically with patents, that probably means a patent in another country, not necessarily a US patent. Are the institutions that you're collaborating with maybe on any of the naughty lists? And by that list, we mean DoD. So for us, it means if they're on the export control entity list, which means the government's flagged them as maybe not being a good person to work with. The memo, the DoD memo, the last couple pages of that 20 pages includes a list of institutions that they've confirmed are engaging in activity that they don't think is conducive to successful international collaborations, and may pose that threat to national security. So that matrix is pretty good. Well, once they finalize that, and we will send that out to everyone, but it's still pretty interesting to take a look at. So what is the Malign Foreign Talent Recruitment Program? So this is any type of program, so it doesn't have to be called a foreign talent program. And this is just a summary. I didn't copy paste word for word. This is just a very high level summary, but it gives you a pretty good idea of any one of the following. So for example, the one that kind of worries me is, are you limited in capacity to carry out that federal research award? That's not really a hard black and white line to look at. Does it overlap with the federal research award? A lot of this stuff are things that they've already have always required, just maybe not necessarily enforced. And then the reason I highlight the and is because it seems like the feds are getting a lot of questions of, hey, do you mean and here? And so, yes, they mean and. So it's one of the top ones and one of the bottom ones. I want to point out here that that first one, a foreign country of concern, we identified on our side, I'll go into more detail, as China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. Notice here that they are including Hong Kong and Macau and China. We may see that change on our side. We haven't yet, because we've actually confirmed we had a collaboration with Hong Kong. We sent a system and they confirmed they don't consider that a country of concern, but that may change based on some of what may be coming down from DoD or the feds. So just kind of a heads up that Hong Kong, I haven't seen anyone specific to Macau, but we do see Hong Kong quite a bit. That may be a change you guys see. We do ask in our Huron disclosures, hopefully you guys have all done your Huron disclosures if you're a researcher. We do ask about talent awards. And so if we do see a yes there, we probably will get with you and just see if that would be considered a malign foreign talent recruitment program. So where does that go? So all of that is kind of the preface to this is now why we have this new regulation. So hopefully this isn't first time some of you are hearing this. It was a new regulation that went into effect in August of last year. The high-risk global engagement definition, that's pretty easy because that deals with a contract. So an actual written agreement between us, and a country of concern. The high-risk international collaboration is where we received a lot of questions when this was first coming out. And as you can see, this definition is very, very vague. It includes a lot. So it includes that unfunded professional development training and services, or unfunded outside appointments, honorary positions. It includes any kind of unfunded outside support. So, you have lab space, or maybe you have access to those grad students that maybe we're not paying for, that other entity's paying for, but they're still supporting your project. So all of that would be considered a high-risk international collaboration that would require approval by the system vice chancellor for research. And that's currently Dr. Joey Lab, if you guys know him. Our countries of concern, like I mentioned, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. If it's updated to Hong Kong, of course, we'll let everyone know. But what that means is that requires an additional review step. We were required to put a rule in place. And so what that rule had to do was address who is responsible for reviewing and approving on the university side. So academic agreements would be the Vice President for Academic and Strategic Partnerships. It's Dr. Susan Balbina. On the research agreement side, that's the VPR, which is Dr. Jack Baldoff. We had to have a process, which a lot of this we already did because we've had a lot of these processes in place for many years. And we just had to kind of confirm we have a process for reviewing those conflicts of commitments, conflicts of interest, export control reviews, and any undue foreign influence research security concerns. And then what we have to do once we get the vice president's respective approvals on our side, or they may not approve. If they do approve, then we have to send it to system to get the vice chancellor for research approval. We also had to have a requirement to complete export control training once every 2 years. So for those of you involved in high-risk international collaborations or global engagements that aren't already required to complete export control training, you'll see that assigned to you in TrainTrack. There's an entities list that we have posted on our website that so that includes entities that generally we're not allowed to collaborate with. So you pretty much know if you're asking us to collaborate with a researcher at Harbin, Harbin's been on the list. They're kind of our poster child. Nanjing's on the list too, probably will be denied. If it's been existing, we do try to work on ways that if it isn't a national security concern, we really try to figure out a way where you can maybe finish something out that you've been working on for years, but probably new things will not be approved. Just I want to remind people, Russia, I know I keep saying Russia is a country of concern. Right now with the memo, the chancellor's memo from March of 2022, nothing with Russia is allowed. So really it's kind of a don't even ask because it won't be approved. We just know it won't be approved from anyone, any kind of collaboration with anyone. It's not calling out Russian citizens, but if that Russian citizen is involved with affiliated with an entity in Russia, it is going to be denied. And we do have FAQs posted on our website. And you guys had a lot of FAQs for us, which is great. If we've missed any, let us know because we're always happy to update that and clarify anything we need because this is a kind of a confusing regulation. What we have done with Huron, I just want to mention briefly, is a lot of these regulations I'm talking about, we are handling within Huron now. So financial conflicts of interest, that was previously in Maestro. If you get your disclosure done in Huron, you're compliant there. Our conflict of commitment and faculty consulting external employment. So, those were all hard copy forms. That is now rolled into Huron. And we've also asked about foreign talent awards in Huron. So that kind of helps us meet the NSPM 33. We're hoping we've captured just about everything the feds are telling us we have to do. So we really hope to do that within that disclosure system. So what does this mean? Any global engagement or international collaboration with the country of concern will require additional approval from that system vice chancellor for research. So I really want to point out, because this has been confused, so travel. If you are traveling to a conference in China, whether you're collaborating or not, has to go up for global engagement approval to system. Sponsored projects. So we've got a lot of projects that as part of our annual review, that collaborator in China may have been approved last year from surely an export control standpoint. Well, now that we're looking at it from research security or the Fed's new requirements, may or may not be approved. So kind of keep that in mind. Your external employment outside activities, if they're involved, that country of concern, China, Russia, you can't do. Iran, we see a little bit. North Korea, I don't think we've ever seen. Just account for that. Will take a little bit of extra time because it's got to go through another approval step now. Those appointments. So you've got an honorary professor position at Harbin, just because I use that as an example, in China. We as well as the feds are going to want to know a little bit more about that. What does that honorary position mean? What are you doing at Harbin? Those collaborations, so funded or unfunded. And same with agreements. So whether they're funded or not. So we've got a lot of unfunded activities that weren't being captured under, weren't receiving export control review, weren't being captured for research security, foreign influence type reviews. Those are all included in this regulation that require review. And then I'm just going to kind of go over just some existing policies that we have, and to give you that kind of flow in with the global engagement, disclosures, commitment, that kind of thing. So if any of you guys are researchers, you're probably familiar with our conflicts of interest regulation. So it had a big change in 2012, hasn't really been changed since. There may be a change. NSF has added a definition to SFI that includes venture or other capital financing. And so we, as well as just every other university in the US, is very confused with what they expect out of that. And so we don't know if they're talking about maybe the PI's capital, the entire startup. Are they wanting us to include angel investors? I think angel investors, you have to be US based anyway to be an angel investor. But what do they want us to do here? And so we don't know. They know we have questions, and so they're working on some guidance. Once we have guidance and know what exactly they're expecting from us there, this reg will probably be updated. You may see another question in Huron to address this, but just kind of as a heads up. So it hadn't been changed in 13 years or 11 years. We may see a slight change, but for the most part, everything else, I wish they would change the 5,000. I do wish they would up that, because I feel like we get a lot of things disclosed that really don't create a financial conflicts of interest at that level. But as of now, still 5,000. The faculty consulting external professional employment. So this is the 310501 and the 310502, depending on whether you're faculty or staff. They had a pretty substantial update to the definition in April 2020. That update is underlined here. And so what they did was to include some of that unfunded. So that scholarly or research activity, whether it was funded or not, was considered faculty consulting and external professional employment, and you had to complete that hard copy form. I think they included on the form a $0 threshold to check. What they did in July 2023 is come out and say, okay, technically that's not faculty consulting and or external professional employment, but you still have to disclose that to the members so that they can review for export controls and or high-risk global engagement, high-risk international collaborations. Since in 2020, it's been in place to do it as under external professional employment. We still are recommending that they go into Huron and do it. It's just quicker. It routes to everyone automatically. I think people are kind of getting used to that. But we will handle it if you send it to us by email. It just would take longer probably. I didn't copy paste the 310502 only because it's virtually identical. And really with the feds, with NIH and NSF, they're focusing on our researchers, which typically are our faculty members anyway. Conflict of Commitments Act was new in 2020, I think January of 2020. And really what that was is that's kind of when the Fed started looking at that commitment. They want to know, what are you doing from an outside entity that's substantially similar to or in competition with what you're doing at your university? And so we've listed some examples there. Some of them the feds aren't going to really pay much attention to. If you're in the College of, liberal arts and you're providing private lessons, maybe in an arts field, as long as your supervisor has approved it and has fine from a commitment standpoint, their feds aren't really going to look at that, right? What they are going to look at is maybe that uncompensated activity for that research entity in a country of concern that it looks like it's taking a lot of your time. So we have had some faculty members that the feds have actually called us on and say, hey, we see Dr. So-and-so, they're listed as a full-time director of at this institute in China, and they're a professor here in China, and looks like they have 14 full-time jobs here, but they're your full-time faculty member. Who approved that? And so that's the kind of things they're going to question, especially if they're giving you an award, because they want to make sure that you can do it, have the time to do it, or they're going to award it to someone else who does have the time. So what can you do to stay compliant? So watch for updates. So we envision, the feds are telling us they're going to have all this finalized the end of this year, early next year. So watch for updates. So we will send those out by, email blast and the CPI newsletters, for example. We'll do some outreach. So just please know that some of this is coming down, and disclose. So if you've done your disclosure in Huron and we've seen it, we've probably worked with you if we had any questions, but that is the best thing to do, is disclose. Because now, within the last couple of years, the feds have even had additional requirements of, now we are responsible for making sure that proposal is accurate. So we do go in, and if we see something on the Huron disclosure that we think, oh gosh, and they have NIH funding, let's make sure they disclose NIH. We are trying to check that for you guys. And if we see that it hadn't been disclosed, we're going to go ask you and say, hey, don't forget, this needs to go in your current and pending, or, we're going to really try to help you out, because there's so much administrative paperwork, it seems like, that has to be done now, more so than when I first started 20 years ago. And I know a lot of you guys have been here longer than that. Conflict of commitment and faculty consulting external employment, that's included in Huron. Just make sure you answer those questions. And the global engagements, international collaborations, make sure, if you're working with a country of concern, that you allow plenty of time for review. So submitting that travel request today to go to China because you want to fly out next week is probably not a good idea, because system has come back to us and said, we didn't get this in time to review, we're not going to review it, which we are taking to mean not approved. So just keep that in mind, that if you're going to do some of these activities, you want to collaborate with someone in China, just make sure that it gets disclosed in time to where it has time to go up to system as well, because you don't want to plan on it and then it not be approved. These research members. No, just keep your eye out because we probably will start rolling out updates as the feds finalize what they need, and disclose. I mean, I know I've said that, but if you disclose it, everything, we'll take care of the rest. So if we know about it, we'll get with you if we need to do anything or have any questions, or think the feds may be concerned, we will get with you. So, but other than that, thank you, everyone.